Now, getting into the cool stuff, which is over my left shoulder. And let me give you a little pre-run. What we're going to talk about is intake manifolds for a Daytona Prototype engine. Roy, one of our customers, racing AIX 99 Cobra. Of course, he's got our full suspension, Pro 4R brakes, and came around race brakes. It's a really nice car and big, huge tires. And he went into AIX because he had our early modification to the IRS, which we had to like notch the chassis, and NASA won't allow that. A long time ago, some friends of mine built a car that was so fast that nobody could catch it with that IRS. So seeing it as all that most at that time, most of NASA was West Coast, and nobody out there had an answer. So they just banned it for AI, American Iron, and then moved to AIX. So anyway, the first year he just ran his regular motor, and he wanted some big power. Did not want to turbocharge, did not want to supercharge. So to me, that meant the best 4.6 derived engine was the Daytona Prototype engines, and actually got the last one that was in the back of the warehouse from, I know the engine manager at Roush Yates, and I got the very last Daytona Prototype engine. We're going to talk about that. That's pretty cool. It's dry sump, and we had to do some modifications to get it into his car, but it's a really cool thing. And the only reason we have it apart right now is second to last race, first corner, okay? I call it the first corner, idiot's corner.
He's running for championship.
Yeah, he's running for the championship. So first corner, idiot corner. Somebody ran into somebody, and that somebody ran into Roy and spun him around. Before he could get the clutch in, the engine went backwards. So the end result was, it was significant but not catastrophic. The secondary chain for the cams snapped, and he bent all the valves on the passenger side. So we've got that back in, and we're going through it. And I thought that's just a perfect opportunity to talk about intake manifolds and how you can make power with them. So I think, okay, this is Roy's car. This is like the first year he's run, just a 4.6, and he did pretty well. But I might point out that Roy didn't get to complete the last two races, but he still finished second in the championship. So that was pretty cool. Big thumbs up to Roy. So that's his car. Now it looks a little bit different. We got wider fender flares on it, a lot bigger tires, like 315s in the front, and a nice little wing on the back. And so when I talk about Daytona prototypes, in case people don't know, these are the Daytona prototypes. And I think Daytona prototype started about 2003. Grand Am, which is a NASCAR derivative, and 24 Hours of Daytona, switched over to you have to drive a Daytona prototype to be in 24 Hours of Daytona. So a lot of manufacturers built their engines and also the prototype. Ford started out with a version of the FR500 engine I had some prototype pieces from, and they had both 4.6 and 5.0, and that turned into the original Daytona prototype engine, and then developed into even a better engine by later in the season. And this is what the later version of the Roush Yates Daytona prototype engine looked installed in the car. And this is the manifold we're going to talk about, and you can see how high it is compared to the engine. Okay, this is what the Daytona prototype engine looks in pieces. There's a lot of really cool parts. Now, the crankshaft was pretty surprising. It was kind of lightened up. It was polished and lightened up, taking weight out, rotating mass, so make things rotate faster and quicker. So I thought that was pretty cool. I'd never seen some of the things. And then on the bottom end, this is not a 4.6 block. This is the 5-liter racing block, and you can see there's a lot of extra ribs in there, which you can't see. There are tons of extra material, and it's side bolts and the mains. It also have all these extra bosses out here to bolt stuff on, like dry sumps and things like that. So that was, I've never seen one of those blocks before. That was pretty cool to see that. And here's something I was talking about, the crankshaft. If you look, they're missing a whole bunch of counterweight here. They trimmed the counterweights down and polished it, and there's some other places on the crankshaft that they lightened up and polished, which is just to make it rev faster. And of course, here's the intake ports, pretty sweet. So you can move a lot of air through that. The exhaust ports, move a lot of air out. And the camshafts, you note they're not pointing around like an egg, which means they got a lot of duration, which makes them very lumpy and makes a lot of power at the top end. And we'll talk about top end power here in a little bit. And this is kind of what it all looked like when it went back together before the cam covers and the top went on the intake manifold. And this is actually my FR500 intake manifold. It's magnesium. It was one of the prototypes. And it was actually designed for the street. And what you can see here, these little holes. Okay, those little holes were actually butterfly valves. And the way it was designed, it's got a short runner, long runner, because it's sort of a semi-street application. So at low RPMs, the butterflies are shut. And what happens is the air gets sucked in around the bottom. And we're going to show you there's some long runners down here. The longer the runner, the more torque. The shorter the runner, the more high RPM power. So they had it so at lower RPMs, the butterflies were shut. They used the long runners for torque, and at higher RPMs, the butterflies open, and they used the short runners. Well, we're only running like high RPMs. We actually eliminated the butterflies, and there's two pieces. The bottom part of the manifold, we just blocked it off, which is the same thing they did for the early Daytona Prototype engines. They just blocked off the bottom around the short runners. So anyway, that's kind of what it looks like. I think that's it. And we'll get to showing you some cool parts. I clicked all the buttons correctly, so I'm proud of myself. So, what I talked about, and I'll show you. Now this, we just did, let's see, let me go. Okay. It doesn't sit square, but you can see that, hello, you can see that it kind of echoes on this side. I don't know if you hear that or not, but you can see, man, that's a straight shot into the head and around the valve. Now, there's right in here is where the long runner would dump in. I don't know if you can see that or not. Would dump in. Well, long runners were gone. And you can actually see the long runners on the bottom. Long runners for torque, and we just blocked that off. So all we're using is the short runners. And this is we just cleaned it up. This is magnesium, so we have to treat it again because magnesium wants to corrode really, really quickly. So we just gave it a quick cleanup, and we're going to retreat this before it goes back on the car. But I mean, that is, you got to admit, man, that is a pretty cool intake manifold, and it's really good for high RPMs. And this intake manifold, the runners are about 5.5 inches up. Here's the top part. Just fell on my foot. And the top part is pretty much like a standard Cobra. We used 62 millimeter throttle body. We didn't go crazy on throttle body. It's something you have to be careful of if you're looking for performance in your car. A lot of people just, put a huge throttle body on there, and it might not. No, hair's getting fluffy again. It's the weather. It's raining like crazy. It's a bad hair day. Put a big throttle body on, and in reality, I mean, just doing a throttle body. Well, my hair is crazy today. Just doing a throttle body may not give you that much more power. Sometimes if you go too big on a throttle body, what happens is you crack that, a lot more air comes in than the intake manifold can handle, and it actually does not help your power that much. A throttle body has to be part of a system. And I talk about on suspensions and chassis, everything I do is a system, rear suspension system, a front suspension system. But making power is also a system. And that's going to be next week's topic about making power. But the point is that just putting a big throttle body on may not give you, what you're looking for. My suggestion, what we do instead of throttle bodies is you do like headers, intake manifold, and a tune. And, the throttle body that comes from the factory is engineered for the flow that the intake manifold can handle. So, I mean, just a word of warning, I mean, these big throttle bodies look like they're going to make huge power. It's very, very little. It's surprisingly little if you don't do anything else. So anyway, that's the whole throttle body story. Now what happened is we want to put the Daytona Prototype engine in. This is the intake manifold, as you saw in the pictures, the Roush Yates intake manifold. Now this is like the last series, the last generation. And I'm lost back here. Hold on, here I am. And it's plastic on the bottom and carbon fiber on top. I didn't take it apart because there's a gazillion bolts and it's a real pain. But you can see from the back that the runners underneath this webbing, the runners kind of crisscross, and they go right down. They go right into the center. Unlike on the FR500, but down the side, he's actually going into the center. And these runners are the FR500 intake. The runner's about 5.5 inches, and on this about 8.5 inches. And my guess is that the prototype engines are endurance engines, and they don't want to wring the snot out of them because the harder this old saying, a dog that craps fast doesn't crap long. So. So I'm sure what they did, they wanted to dial it back and run in the lower RPM range for endurance. So that's why the runner's like 8.5 inches. Anyway, that's a bunch taller than the standard manifold, and it was difficult. It was going to be difficult. I had to make some modifications to get the hood down. Plus, we had to do a whole bunch of ducting and create a whole new air system. And I mean, the engine was expensive enough at that point. So we chose to use my FR500 intake manifold because it would sit down low. Well, we set it on the motor, and guess what? It didn't match up. I mean, the ports were so much bigger and in a different spot that the intake manifold didn't match up. The other thing is the headers, the bolt pattern on the headers didn't match up with the Daytona Prototype heads. So we actually had to fill the old holes and drill and tap and helical new holes for headers. So that was all ready to go. We set my intake manifold on and it was like, oh man, what a disappointment. So what I ended up doing is ended up using my FR500 heads, which are like an early version of that. And that's with the motor, that 570 horsepower naturally aspirated, which isn't too bad. But we're at some point we'll probably go the full boat because we have to put the upper end, the DP engine on. We'd have to do a standalone fuel system and a standalone ECU. So that's why we kind of stuck with the FR500 stuff on the top end, and then also we're able to use the factory processor, which saves a lot of money. So that's kind of how we ended up with that, and it's an amazing motor. I mean, even though it's quote 4.6 production based, it's so different than a standard 4.6 engine. Obviously, I mean, you saw the block, you saw the crank, the heads flow a whole bunch more air. It's got a really cool intake manifold. So that's kind of like the thing with intake manifold: long runners torque, short runners power at the top end. Which is a long runner's low end torque and power at the top end for a short runner. And that's why you see, like on a lot of high RPM cars, you got little short stacks.